Between 1964 and 1982, Leonid Brezhnev governed the Soviet Union, leader that took the country to the top of power and economic influence, but also indecisive and megalomaniac that took the country to an economic collapse. Some of the reasons were excessive spending on arms and intervention, corruption, and increasingly inefficient. The economy of Soviet Union was falling. In 1985, Gorbachev was elected. He was a reformist leader that proposed the reconstruction of the economy and to create a free political system with openness and transparency. Despite these reformist efforts, the Soviet economy continued to decline and the countries of the communist bloc began showing discontent, leading to a series of social movements that opened the door to revolutions. In the middle of the 1980s, about 30% of the industrial output of the Soviet Union was going to the military. The origin of these revolutionary events can be found in Poland. Around 1988, when a series of strikes and civil movements began to put pressure on the need for political change. In 1989, there was a call for elections. The Solidarity movement nominated Tadeusz Mazowiecki as the new prime minister, resulting in a win, and he stopped more than 40 years of communist government. The Soviet Union decided not to intervene and began the fall of the communist bloc. In Eastern Germany, the transition was symbolic and marked the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union and its sphere of influence. As World War II came to an end in 1945, the Eastern part of the country went to the Soviet Union, while the western part went to the United States, Great Britain, and France. The night Premier Khrushchev gave the East German government permission to stop the flow of immigrants by closing its borders for good. In just 2 weeks, the East German Army, police force, and volunteer construction workers had completed a makeshift barbed wire and concrete block wall, the Berlin Wall, that divided one side of the city from the other.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
The reunification of East and West Germany was made official on October 3, 1990, almost 1 year after the fall of the Berlin Wall. A strong drive for reunification developed in East-West Germany in 1990. In East Germany, conservative parties supporting reunification won the elections, and the new government and the force of events proceed to dismantle the state. Economic union with the West occurred in July and on October 3, in 1990, political reunification took place under what had been the West German constitution. Upon the fall of its principal supporting governments, the internal crisis in the Soviet Union heightened. In 1990, the three Baltic republics, Estonia, Lithuania, and Lithuania, unilaterally declared their independence from the Soviet Union, setting a precedent for the rest of the Soviet Republic states. Desperate, Gorbachev tried to put a halt to the inevitable by deploying the military, increased internal scrutiny, and internal squabbling, however, put an end to any Soviet intent to regain control. Boris Yeltsin was the last president of the United Soviet Socialist Republic of Russia, and he played a very important role in the dissolution of the USSR. Using his influence, he orchestrated a series of political setbacks to dismiss and virtually disappear whatever power Gorbachev had left. The most important of these movements was the founding and promoting of the Commonwealth of Independent States. Globalization is referred to a process of interaction and integration among the people, companies, and governments of different nations, a process driven by international trade and investment and aided by informational technology. This process has effects on the environment, on culture and political systems, on economy development and prosperity, and on human physical well-being and societies around the world. Terrorism has been described variously as both a tactic and a strategy, a crime and a holy duty, a justified reaction to oppression and an executable abomination. The calculated use of unlawful violence or treat on unlawful violence to inculcate fear, intended to coerce or to intimidate governments or societies in the pursuit of goals that are generally political, religious, or ideological. Terrorism is not new, and even though it has been used since the early times of recorded history, it can be relatively hard to define terrorism. A unipolar world refers to two or more countries coming together to make a chance, to support, to combat a problem, fight a battle, or order things. They may be countries from the same continent or different. They can be based on different aspects such as economy, sociopolitical, among others. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, the beginning of German unification the following year, the Gulf War, and the official break of the Soviet Union were the events that marked most of the new world orders that was established at the end of the decade 18 of the 20th century. The digital era is characterized by technology which increases the speed and breadth of knowledge to move within the economy and society. The digital era can be seen as the development of an evolutionary system in which knowledge to mover is not only very high, but also increasingly out of the control of humans, making it time in which our lives become more difficult to manage. Our time in which our lives become more difficult to manage is the understanding of the knowledge embedded within the human genome about how we relate to the world, generating association with technology and freely available on the internet raises questions about our assumptions of control. The social and economic implications of the digital era are huge and will increase as technologically functionality becomes more knowledge based. Our everyday lives and understanding ourselves become more linked to it, and it takes on a life of its own. There are many theories and each one has its own starting point. Nayan Chanda from the Yale Center of the Study of Globalization states that globalization began 80,000 years ago because at the time all the forces that would push globalization forward were already in place. He wrote, essentially, the basic motivation that propelled humans to connect with others, the urge to profit by trading, the drive to spread religious beliefs, the desire to exploit new islands, and the ambition to dominate order by armed might all have been assembled by 60,000 BCE to start a process we now call globalization. Other possible starting dates are when Christopher Columbus discovered the New World in 1942, the first time someone circumnavigated the world in 1522. The Industrial Revolution would begin in the late 18th century and the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. The World Bank states that there have been three waves of globalization. The first one began in 1870 and ended at the beginning of the World War I in 1914. The next wave occurred from 1950 to 1980, during which multiple trade agreements occurred between developing nations with left out the developing world. The final and current wave of globalization, beginning in 1980, in contrast, has been characterized by the willingness of developing nations to remove trade barriers in order to attract foreign capital. The first half of the 20th century saw two events that influenced the nature of conflict to the present day. The effects of two world wars inflamed passion and hopes of nationalists throughout the world, and several damaged the legitimacy of the international order and governments. Nationalism intensified during the early 20th century throughout the world. It became an especially powerful force in the subject people of various colonial empires. Although dissent and resistance were common in many colonial possessions, and sometimes resulted in open warfare. Nationalist identities became a focal point for this action. Gradually, as nations became closely tied to concept of race and ethnicity, international political developments began to support such concepts. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, the first of a series of events bringing the period known as the Cold War to an end. From a state of military multipolarity, the world had progressed to one of bipolarity to the current situation of unipolarity. It is difficult to see whether or not the world had become more secure following the end of the Cold War. In 1979, Kenneth Waltz presented his hypothesis stating that the world is more stable if dominated by fewer numbers of great powers. His argument was that alliances become more diffuse in a multipolar world than in a bipolar world. In the multipolar era of world history, six states competed for influences and the distribution of power was changing constantly. The Cold War period was stable because domination was shared between two superpowers. Much had changed during the years since Waltz presented his hypothesis. Digital era is a technological era. It has influenced and affected change in the population in a massive and drastic way. Right now, most of the population need technology to live. Some work from it, some win money from it. Students needed to do homework to study. It has changed incredibly the population. It's now a zombie world ruled by technology.